December 20th, 1944. Bastogne, Belgium. The temperature had plummeted to -20 degrees Celsius, and a heavy blanket of snow muffled the sounds of the 101st Airborne Division digging in around the vital crossroads town. General Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz, commander of the German XLVI Panzer Corps, smiled with confidence as he drafted his ultimatum to the American forces. With 5 panzer divisions encircling the town and American supplies running critically low, he was certain the town would fall within 48 hours. The Americans, he believed, would soon be forced to surrender or starve. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What General von Luttwitz could not foresee was how a remarkable logistical operation, involving thousands of African-American truck drivers, the largest convoy operation in military history, and the sheer industrial might of America, would transform this siege from a certain German victory into one of the most legendary stands in military history. The wind howled through the pine forests surrounding Bastogne as Colonel William Roberts of the 10th Armored Division surveyed his dwindling supplies. His combat command had rushed to Bastogne just days earlier, on December 18th, and now found themselves completely surrounded along with elements of the 101st Airborne Division. Roberts had entered the war believing in American superiority, but now, watching his men shiver in their foxholes with barely enough ammunition to last another day, doubt crept in. How many rounds per gun? Roberts asked his supply officer, Captain Gerald Miller. Miller consulted his clipboard, frost forming on his mustache as he spoke. 8 shells per 105 mm howitzer, sir. Maybe 30 rounds per M1 rifle. Rations for 3 days, maximum. Roberts nodded grimly. And fuel? 20 gallons per tank. Not enough to break out, even if we wanted to. 5 miles away, in the village of Noville, Obersturmbannführer Werner Pochke of the 1st SS Panzer Division watched through binoculars as his men positioned their Tiger tanks behind the cover of a stone farmhouse. A decorated veteran of the Eastern Front, Pochke had seen the massive industrial might of the Soviets firsthand, but still believed in German tactical superiority. His Panzer Division had 71 operational tanks, compared to the mere 22 American tanks now trapped in Bastogne. The Americans are completely cut off, reported his intelligence officer, Untersturmführer Hans Weiss, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who had once been a history professor at Heidelberg. Their nearest supply lines are over 70 kilometers away, and with this weather, no aircraft can reach them. Pochke nodded with satisfaction. We have 1,200 artillery rounds per day at our disposal. They have perhaps 200 total. It is simple mathematics, Weiss. We will pound them until they surrender or starve. What neither German officer realized was that 110 miles northwest, at the port of Antwerp, the most remarkable logistical operation of the war was already being mobilized. Technical Sergeant James Robinson of the 3rd Red Ball Express Transportation Company checked the tire pressure on his GMC CCKW 2.5-ton truck, nicknamed Betsy. Robinson, a 24-year-old from Harlem who had been a mechanic before the war, had been driving supply routes across France since D-Day. His company, like most of the Red Ball Express, was composed primarily of African-American soldiers. Robinson, command tent, on the double, shouted First Lieutenant Michael O'Hara, his company commander. Inside the hastily erected command tent, Robinson found himself among 20 other drivers. Maps were spread across folding tables, weighted down with coffee mugs and C-ration cans. Colonel Roderick Allen, commander of the 19 Corps Support Group, stood at the head of the table, his face grim. Gentlemen, the 101st Airborne and elements of 10th Armored are surrounded at Bastogne, Allen announced, pointing to a circled position on the map. They're outnumbered 5-1 and critically short on everything: ammunition, medical supplies, food, fuel. We've got 10,000 trucks mobilizing across the theater, but your company will lead the convoy. The room fell silent as Allen continued. You'll be driving through German-held territory. The weather is too poor for air cover. Most roads are iced over. Normally, I'd say this is impossible, but those boys in Bastogne don't have that luxury. Robinson studied the route. It would take them through the Ardennes forest, over icy mountain roads, directly through areas where German patrols were active. The standard Red Ball Express route across France had been challenging enough, but this was different. This was suicide. Questions? Alan asked. A driver named Private Lewis Wilson raised his hand. Sir, are we getting escort vehicles? Tanks, maybe. Alan shook his head. Every combat vehicle is committed to the front. You'll have 1.50 caliber machine gun per 10 trucks. That's it. Robinson swallowed hard. As a black soldier in 1944, he was accustomed to limitations. The Red Ball Express drivers weren't allowed in the same mess halls as white soldiers. They received less training, older equipment. But now, suddenly, they were being asked to drive straight into hell to save white combat troops. We'll do it, sir, Robinson said, standing. When do we roll out? 1900 hours. That's. Alan checked his watch. 4 hours from now. Get your men ready, Lieutenant O'Hara. As the meeting dispersed, Robinson approached O'Hara. Lieutenant, do you think we can make it through? O'Hara, a Boston native who had initially resisted commanding a black unit, but had grown to respect his men deeply, placed a hand on Robinson's shoulder. If anyone can do it, it's you boys. You've moved more tonnage faster than anyone thought possible. Now it's time to show them what the Red Ball Express can really do. Back in Bastogne, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st Airborne, received the ultimatum from the German command. The message was clear: surrender or face annihilation. His famous response, nuts, would soon become legendary, but at that moment, it seemed like little more than bravado. The reality of their situation was grim. We've got 11,000 men and no way to feed them beyond Friday, reported Colonel Paul Danahy, the division intelligence officer. McAuliffe nodded. What about medical supplies? Major Albert Burnt, the division surgeon, shook his head. Critical shortages of everything: morphine, plasma, sulfa drugs. We've got over 300 wounded men already, and that number will only increase. The meeting was interrupted by the arrival of Private First Class Martin Fitzgerald, a radio operator who had maintained a tenuous link with 3rd Army headquarters. Sir, Fitzgerald said, excitement evident in his voice despite his exhaustion. I've just received word from 3rd Army. They're sending supplies. McAuliffe's eyebrows rose. By airdrop? No, sir. By truck. Something called the Red Ball Express. They say 10,000 trucks are being redirected to us. The officers exchanged skeptical glances. The idea of trucks breaking through a German encirclement, in this weather, seemed impossible. When McAuliffe asked, first elements expected within 36 hours, sir. McAuliffe turned to his operations officer. Can we hold that long? We have no choice, sir. As night fell on December 20th, the first convoy of the Red Ball Express, 200 trucks from 3 transportation companies, departed from Antwerp. Technical Sergeant Robinson led the way in Betsy, with Lieutenant O'Hara riding shotgun. Behind them stretched a line of GMC CCKW trucks, each laden with up to 5 tons of supplies despite their 2.5-ton rating. They were drastically overloaded, making the already treacherous icy roads even more dangerous. The convoy moved without headlights, drivers navigating by moonlight reflecting off the snow. Blackout conditions were essential to avoid German air attacks, but it made the mountain roads nearly impossible to navigate. By midnight, they had covered only 30 miles, with another 80 to go. We'll never make it at this rate, O'Hara muttered, checking his watch. Robinson gripped the steering wheel tighter. We'll make it, Lieutenant. We always do. O'Hara studied his driver's profile in the dim moonlight. You know, Robinson, when I first got assigned to this unit, I didn't want to be here. Thought you boys wouldn't have what it takes. Robinson kept his eyes on the road. And now I'd take one of you over 10 of those college boys. They're making officers these days. A smile flickered across Robinson's face, but it died quickly as headlights appeared on the road ahead. Germans, he hissed, immediately dousing his own blackout lights completely. O'Hara grabbed the radio. All trucks, kill lights and pull right. German patrol ahead. 200 trucks silently eased to the side of the road, engines idling as a German mechanized patrol passed by less than 50 yards away, 3 Kubelwagens and a half-track. By some miracle, they didn't spot the massive American convoy hiding in plain sight. Once the patrol passed, Robinson released the breath he'd been holding. That was close. O'Hara nodded. Too close. And that won't be the last patrol. Let's move out. By dawn, the convoy had reached the village of Hubble-la-Neuve, just 40 miles from Bastogne. Here, they encountered their first real obstacle, a roadblock manned by elements of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division. Pull over, O'Hara ordered, grabbing his binoculars. The roadblock consisted of 2 MG-42 machine gun nests and about 30 infantry, with a Panzer IV tank partially hidden in a barn. Robinson assessed the situation. We can't go around. The roads are too narrow, and we'd get stuck in the snow. O'Hara made a quick decision. We'll have to fight through. Get the .50 calories up front. The convoy reorganized, with 5 trucks mounting Browning M2 heavy machine guns moving to the lead position. The drivers, men like Corporal Henry Jefferson and Private First Class William Smalls, had received minimal combat training, but they were determined. On my signal, O'Hara said into the radio, the gun trucks will open fire. Everyone else, pedal to the metal. Don't stop for anything. At O'Hara's signal, the Brownings opened fire, their distinctive thudding bark cutting through the morning air. The German positions returned fire immediately, but the sudden onslaught took them by surprise. The American trucks accelerated, a wave of steel and determination crashing through the roadblock. Robinson's truck was third in line. He watched as the lead vehicle took multiple hits, its windshield shattering, but the driver, Corporal Marcus Johnson, kept going, even as blood streamed down his face from glass cuts. The second truck veered off the road as its driver was hit, crashing into one of the German machine gun positions. Then it was Robinson's turn. He floored the accelerator, the truck's engine roaring in protest as it picked up speed. Bullets pinged off the hood and tore through the canvas top. Beside him, O'Hara fired his M1 carbine through the window. Keep going, O'Hara shouted. Robinson drove straight through the chaos, past burning vehicles and fighting men. Behind him, the rest of the convoy followed, a thundering herd of overloaded trucks forcing their way through by sheer momentum. 10 minutes later, with the roadblock 5 miles behind them, Robinson finally allowed himself to breathe normally again. They had lost 12 trucks and 7 men, but the convoy was through. You did good back there, O'Hara said, bandaging a graze wound on his arm. Robinson nodded, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Still got a long way to go, Lieutenant. At the same time, inside Bastogne, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. German artillery pounded the American positions constantly. In a makeshift aid station set up in the basement of a bombed-out church, Captain Eleanor Collins, one of the few nurses who had been caught in the encirclement, worked frantically to save wounded soldiers with dwindling supplies. I need more plasma, she called out, her hands covered in blood as she tried to stabilize a young paratrooper with a stomach wound. Medic Samuel Glickstein shook his head. That was the last bag, ma'am. We're completely out. Collins looked around the room at the dozens of wounded men. Without plasma, morphine, or antibiotics, many of them wouldn't survive the night. She had trained at Johns Hopkins, where supplies were never an issue. The stark contrast between American abundance at home and the desperate shortages here struck her forcefully. Do what you can with what we have, she said to Glickstein. Boil bandages for reuse. Water down the remaining morphine. We need to make everything last. On the eastern perimeter of Bastogne, Sergeant Frank Dominguez of Baker Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, huddled in his foxhole with Private Eddie Morris. The two men had been together since jump training at Fort Benning, through the Normandy drops and Operation Market Garden. Now they were down to their last clips of ammunition. 3 rounds per man, per hour, Dominguez instructed his squad. Make every shot count. Morris, a skinny kid from rural Georgia, nodded grimly. What happens when we run out completely, Sarge? Dominguez didn't have an answer. They both knew what would happen. They'd be overrun. The previous day, they had watched as a German attack had nearly broken through the line held by Charlie Company, stopped only by the timely arrival of their last operational Sherman tank, which itself had been running on fumes. Heard a rumor that supplies are coming, Dominguez finally said. Morris snorted. Yeah, I heard that too. 10,000 trucks or something crazy. Ain't no way. You never know, Dominguez replied, more to keep morale up than from any real belief. Just then, Their conversation was interrupted by the distinctive whistle of incoming artillery. Both men pressed themselves into the bottom of their foxhole as explosions rocked the earth around them. When the barrage lifted, Dominguez cautiously raised his head to check on his men. What he saw made his blood run cold. German infantry advancing through the trees, at least a company's strength, with 2 Panther tanks in support. "Contact front," he shouted, raising his M1 rifle. With only 15 rounds remaining, he would have to make every shot count. Meanwhile, the Red Ball Express convoy had reached the outskirts of Bastogne, but found themselves facing the most difficult challenge yet, breaking through the actual German encirclement to reach the besieged Americans. Colonel Allen, who had caught up with the convoy, gathered the drivers for a final briefing. "Intelligence reports that the thinnest point in the German line is here," he said, pointing to a spot on the map northeast of Bastogne. "It's mainly held by infantry from the 26th Volksgrenadier, with minimal armor support." Robinson studied the map. "That's still at least a battalion of infantry, sir. And our trucks aren't exactly stealthy." Allen nodded. "That's why we're not going to sneak through. We're going to punch through, at maximum speed, with everything we've got." The plan was audacious. All 188 remaining trucks would charge the German line simultaneously, spread across a 1-mile front. The sheer shock and scale of such an attack might allow them to break through before the Germans could organize an effective response. "We go at dusk," Allen ordered. 1700 hours. As the drivers prepared their vehicles, Robinson checked every inch of Betsy. He changed the spark plugs, adjusted the carburetor, and topped off the oil. This truck had carried him safely across thousands of miles of war-torn Europe. Now he needed her to deliver one more time. Private Wilson approached, lighting a cigarette. "You think this crazy plan will work?" Robinson shrugged. "Doesn't matter what I think. Those boys in Bastogne need these supplies, so we're going to deliver them." Wilson took a long drag. "You know, my daddy fought in the last war. Came back with a French medal and still couldn't vote in Mississippi. Said things would be different for my generation." Robinson tightened a belt on the engine. "Maybe they will be. If we pull this off, they can't ignore what we did here." At 5 p.m., with the winter darkness already descending, the trucks lined up along their assigned positions. Each driver had been given the location of American lines and recognition signals. If they made it through, they would need to be identified quickly as friendly to avoid being fired upon by the very men they were trying to save. Colonel Allen's voice crackled over the radio. "All units, this is Red Ball Actual. Godspeed and good luck. Operation begins in 3, 2, 1. Execute." With a thunderous roar, 188 engines revved to maximum power, and the trucks surged forward across the snowy fields. They had discarded any pretense of stealth now, headlights blazing to illuminate the treacherous terrain ahead. Inside Bastogne, the 101st Airborne troops were fighting desperately to repel the German assault on the eastern perimeter. Sergeant Dominguez's squad had been pushed back to their secondary positions, ammunition nearly depleted. "Last clip," Morris announced, slapping his final magazine into his rifle. Dominguez nodded grimly. "Make it count." Suddenly, a strange sound reached their ears, a distant rumbling, growing louder by the second. At first, Dominguez thought it was more German tanks, but the sound was different, higher-pitched, more numerous. "What the hell is that?" Morris asked, straining to see through the gathering darkness. Then they saw them, headlights, hundreds of them, cutting through the woods to their east. For a moment, panic set in. Was this another German attack force? But the vehicles were moving too fast, too recklessly for German armor. And they were coming from the wrong direction, moving toward the American lines rather than away from them. "Those are our boys," Dominguez exclaimed, suddenly understanding. "Those are our supply trucks." The Red Ball Express convoy had hit the German lines like a hurricane. Most of the Volksgrenadier troops, expecting an attack by armor or infantry, were completely unprepared for the sight of 188 trucks charging directly at their positions at 50 miles per hour. Robinson gripped his steering wheel with white knuckles as Betsy bounced and slid across the uneven terrain. Bullets pinged off the hood and shattered his side mirror. Beside him, O'Hara fired his carbine one-handed while holding onto the dashboard for dear life. "There's the line," O'Hara shouted, pointing ahead to where American paratroopers were suddenly appearing from their foxholes, waving and cheering. Robinson aimed straight for the gap between two American positions. Behind him, trucks were being hit, veering off course, some catching fire as fuel tanks were punctured. But the majority kept going, an unstoppable tide of American industrial might surging through the German encirclement by sheer momentum and determination. As Robinson's truck crossed into American lines, paratroopers swarmed around it, cheering and pounding on the doors. O'Hara leaned out the window. "Where do we unload?" "Town Square," a captain shouted back. "Follow the MPs." One by one, the trucks of the Red Ball Express rolled into Bastogne. Of the 188 that had begun the final charge, 142 made it through. The others had been destroyed or disabled by German fire, their drivers either killed or captured. But those 142 vehicles carried over 500 tons of vital supplies, ammunition, food, fuel, and medical equipment. In the town square, General McAuliffe personally greeted Colonel Allen. "I don't know how you did it," McAuliffe said, shaking Allen's hand vigorously. "But you've just saved this division." Allen gestured to the drivers, who were already unloading their trucks with the help of grateful infantrymen. "Thank them, General. They're the ones who drove through hell to get here." McAuliffe nodded, approaching Sergeant Robinson, who was directing the unloading of medical supplies bound for the aid station. "Sergeant, on behalf of every man in this perimeter, thank you." Robinson, exhausted but proud, saluted. "Just doing our job, sir." At the aid station, the arrival of fresh medical supplies transformed the situation overnight. Captain Collins nearly wept when she saw the crates of plasma, morphine, and antibiotics being carried in. "This will save hundreds of lives," she told Glickstein as they quickly organized the new supplies. The medic nodded, watching as trucks continued to arrive. "Where did they all come from? How did they get through? Does it matter?" Collins replied, already preparing to treat patients with the newly arrived plasma. "They're here. That's what matters." By midnight, all the supplies had been unloaded and distributed throughout the American perimeter. The trucks were refueled from the precious gasoline they had delivered, ready for the equally dangerous journey out. Many would stay to evacuate wounded, while others would return with reports and intelligence. In a command post set up in the basement of Bastogne's town hall, General McAuliffe met with his staff to reassess their situation. "Ammunition status?" he asked. Colonel Danahy consulted his clipboard. "From critical to abundant, sir. We've gone from 8 rounds per howitzer to over 200. Small arms ammunition fully restocked. Even have extra bazookas and anti-tank mines now. Fuel. Enough to keep all our vehicles operational for at least 2 weeks. Tanks are fully topped off. Medical supplies? More than adequate. Captain Collins reports she now has everything she needs." McAuliffe nodded with satisfaction. "And food." At this, Danahy actually smiled. "Enough K-rations and D-rations for 30 days, sir. Plus, the drivers brought Christmas turkeys." Apparently, it was General Patton's specific order. The news spread quickly throughout the American lines. Men who had been preparing to fight to the last bullet suddenly found themselves well supplied and reinvigorated. The psychological impact was enormous, not just because of the material support, but because of what it represented. Their country had not forgotten them. The industrial might of America, which could produce 324,000 aircraft, 102,500 armored vehicles, 372,000 artillery pieces, and 47 million tons of artillery ammunition during the war, had found a way to reach them, even here, cut off behind enemy lines. 5 miles away, in the German command post, General von Luttwitz received the disturbing news. "Impossible," he said when told of the American supply convoy. "We have a complete encirclement. Nothing could have gotten through." Obersturmbannführer Pochk, who had been called to report, stood stiffly at attention. "Nevertheless, Herr General, it is true. Our aerial reconnaissance confirms at least 100 American trucks entered Bastogne last night. They brought substantial supplies." Von Luttwitz paced the room, struggling to understand. In his experience on the Russian front, encircled forces had always eventually surrendered due to lack of supplies. The fact that the Americans could punch through an encirclement with trucks, not tanks or infantry, but supply vehicles, was almost inconceivable. "What does this mean for our timetable?" he asked finally. Pochk hesitated. "Sir, based on what we now know they have received, I would say our assumption that they would be forced to surrender within days is no longer valid. They could hold out indefinitely." The general stopped pacing. "Indefinitely? With our 5 divisions surrounding one?" "The issue is not their combat power, Her General. It is their supplies. And now they have them." The arrival of the Red Ball Express transformed the battle for Bastogne. The 101st Airborne and attached units, rather than fighting a desperate holding action with dwindling resources, could now conduct an aggressive defense. German attacks were met with devastating artillery fire. Now that ammunition constraints had been lifted, American tanks, fully fueled, could counterattack when needed. Most importantly, the psychological advantage had shifted. The American forces knew they had not been abandoned, that the full industrial and logistical might of the United States was behind them, capable of reaching them even through a supposedly impenetrable encirclement. On December 26th, elements of Patton's Third Army broke through to Bastogne, officially ending the siege. But military historians would later agree that the critical moment had come days earlier, when those 142 trucks of the Red Ball Express had demonstrated that there was no such thing as a complete encirclement when American logistics and determination were involved. After the war, Technical Sergeant James Robinson returned to Harlem and used the GI Bill to open his own garage. When asked about his most memorable experience in the war, he would always mention that snowy night when 10,000 trucks were mobilized and his convoy broke through to Bastogne. "The look on those paratroopers' faces when we rolled in," he would say, "that's something I'll never forget." Lieutenant O'Hara went on to become a history professor at Boston College, where he made sure his students learned about the Red Ball Express and the vital role played by African American soldiers in the Allied victory. Soldiers who fought with distinction despite facing discrimination both in the military and at home. The Red Ball Express, over the course of the war, delivered over 412,000 tons of supplies to the advancing Allied armies, often driving 24 hours a day in harsh conditions. The operation was predominantly staffed by African American soldiers who received little recognition at the time, but whose contribution was absolutely critical to victory. For the Germans, the lesson was harsh but clear. It wasn't just American fighting spirit or tactical skill that defeated them. It was the overwhelming productive capacity of American industry and the logistical genius that could deliver that production to the front lines, even under the most challenging conditions imaginable. As for General von Luttwitz, who had been so confident that Bastogne would fall due to lack of supplies, he surrendered to American forces on May 2, 1945. During his debriefing, when asked about the turning point of the Ardennes offensive, he mentioned Bastogne specifically. "We had them surrounded," he said through an interpreter. "By all military logic, they should have surrendered. But then came those trucks, and with them, the realization that American resources were essentially limitless. How does one defeat an enemy who can deliver Christmas dinner to troops behind your own lines?" The story of the Red Ball Express and the resupply of Bastogne illustrates a fundamental truth about modern warfare that the Germans learned too late. Industrial capacity and logistics often matter more than battlefield heroics. The United States produced a staggering 2.5 million trucks during World War II, compared to Germany's 159,000. This disparity in production, multiplied across all categories of war material, made ultimate American victory inevitable. Yet it would be wrong to reduce this to mere numbers. The true lesson of Bastogne is about human determination and courage, not just of the surrounded defenders, but of the supply truck drivers who risked everything to reach them. Men like Sergeant Robinson and his fellow drivers of the Red Ball Express demonstrated that heroism takes many forms in war, and that sometimes the most crucial battles are won not by those who fire the guns, but by those who deliver the bullets. Their extraordinary accomplishment, driving through enemy territory to deliver vital supplies, stands as one of the most remarkable logistical feats in history. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.